And my first lecture that I give is what the definition of a myth is, just broadly speaking. And a myth is a strange thing because a myth is a story. It comes from the Greek word that means word or story. And it's a story that is traditional in the sense that it's handed down from generation to generation. It's handed down from generation to generation, and that means nobody really knows where any of these come from or what the original source of these myths are. But they continue to get told and retold and reshaped in each successive generation. And they're told in such a way that is relevant for the people that are telling the story and for the people that are hearing the story.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Joining me tonight is a return guest. Stephen was part of our 2021 roundtable, and he and I were exchanging a few emails back and forth, and he said something interesting, and I said, ooh, that sounds like a fun topic for a podcast. And he nicely, courteously said, okay, sure, we'll talk about it. So Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jesse. It's good to be back and it's good to be with you.
Yeah, so everything going as well as can be expected up where you are?
Everything is going as well as can be expected. Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. It's going here as well as it is, I think, everywhere else at the moment.
Before I hit record, I was telling you that here in Texas, it's just not, it's a scary time. And we have a lot of people that are, fighting COVID, and it's a weird time, for the economy, that trying to find people. So yeah, it's very, very weird. And as we're recording this, we've got word that Ronnie Spector died today, which was kind of sad news.
That's really sad news. Yeah, that's really sad news.
Yeah, such a wonderful voice and such a dynamic presence, and it was kind of nice because, little Stephen tweeted a little bit the story about how much while they were in the wilderness years of, fighting with Mike Appel, they were able to go with that and work with her, which was just a really nice story.
Yeah, that's right. I know that is what helped keep the band afloat, I think, right?
Yes,
for a little while.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's good. So for those of you who had not heard you on previous episodes, tell us a little about yourself.
So I am a professor of Greek and Latin at a small college in Michigan. Mostly I teach students how to read the New Testament in Greek. That's why most of my students are interested in working with me. But I also contribute to our college's general education program. And one of the courses that I teach is a course in classical mythology. Okay. And that is in part, I think, what we'll be talking a little bit about today.
I think so.
How I use Bruce Springsteen in my classical mythology class.
Yes, you talked about that, and I said, "Oh, we have to talk about this." Why do they want to read the either or the Old or the New Testament in the original Greek? What is the appeal of that?
So I am at it's at a faith-based institution that I teach. It's a Christian school.
Okay.
And many of the students that go there, well, I won't say many, but a good number of students that go there are interested in entering the ministry in one way or another. Okay. And so, most students have to take a foreign language, and a lot of them choose Spanish, as they would in most, everywhere else. But there are a few who want to be able to minister, or in order to be good pastors in their view, being able to read the New Testament in the original will help them on their journey. So that's what brings them to me. It's not a huge number of students, but the students that I have are really devoted to it. So it's fun to teach them.
Because I do know, right, there is that the idea of the original word in Greek can mean different things in modern language, correct?
That's right. And every translation that one might read gets a piece of it, but no word translates exactly, right? That there are some that they have a variety of different meanings, and what my students want to be able to do is to understand all the different possibilities that a particular passage might mean by looking at what the Greek actually says.
Do you have a general example of that, or that might something that comes off that is your class finds pretty interesting or leads to a pretty good discussion point?
Yeah, so pretty early on, I try to teach my students this passage in John 3, chapter 3, where the famous John 3:16 comes from.
Right.
Here in this passage, Jesus is talking to Nicodemus, who is a Pharisee, but he's interested in what Jesus is up to. And the conversation that the two of them have centers on a number of multiple meanings that a few words could have. So when we talk about born again Christians, that word again in Greek means both again and also from above. And so when Jesus is talking to Nicodemus, he's constantly switching between what connotation that word has. He's using the same word, but sometimes he means it in the again sense, and sometimes he means it in the from above sense. And Nicodemus gets all confused. And when we actually look through the passage and see how Jesus is essentially beating a Pharisee at their own game. Pharisees are known for being able to, interpret the word of God and all this. Jesus is running circles around him. And it's actually fun to watch in Greek, and there's no way to do it in English, because in English you have to pick either born again or born from above. In Greek, you get to have both meanings working at the same time and watching the confusion. And so students really love to see that happening. And that's not just the only word. There's other words in that particular passage where that happens.
I was raised Southern Baptist and then converted to Catholicism because Linda and I were dating, and it just seemed to be easier at the time. So I grew up with a lot of Sunday school and a lot of discussions. And one of my early pastors when I was in junior high school was a professor at a local college. And he also, so he had started becoming our pastor as a fill-in pastor for the Baptist church. And then we ended up, the congregation loved him so much, they convinced him to, be a full-time pastor as well as a full-time professor. And so I do remember things about this where he'll talk about in this passage, there's different versions of what the word could mean, and depending on which version can change the meaning of the sentence.
Yeah, exactly.
And I remember Zig Ziglar in one of his On the Way to the Top or whatever talked about, I did not say he stole the money. And depending on which word, I did not say he stole the money. I did not say he stole the money. Depending on which word you put the emphasis on changes the meaning of the sentence totally.
Yeah. And so when I teach my students writing, one of my big bugaboos is where you place only in the sentence, because only acts as a limiter and it can change the meaning of the sentence where you put it. So if you take the sentence, I love you, where I put only makes a difference. If I say only I love you, that's different from me saying I love only you.
Yes. I also read recently, I guess about a year ago, about how military leaders teach people in communication to never use the word but or however.
Right.
And I think about that anytime I'm writing a memo, that when we really think you're doing a good job, but
Right.
wipes out everything that you said before. And it doesn't
Yeah.
always do that, but it kind of in context does. So that's I would think that sounds like a very interesting study to have. And I could see how people wanting to do that to provide the very best um, you know, educated leanings. Christianity is it's a thing of faith, but there also is so much in there. And I'm always amazed at the people that lift up the Bible and every word's the word of God and it's all literal. And I'm like, well, let's be careful how we say that.
Well, and the thing that I always try to remind my students is that
Yes.
Jesus is not always kind to people who claim to know things about God's will
Yes.
when you see him in his ministry. So it's just a little reminder to all of us to be humble too, I think.
I think we're very well done. I remember probably I wasn't in high school yet or junior high. So I must have been fourth or fifth or sixth grade and discovered Greek myths in
Right.
the elementary school library and went through. I've always been someone that when I find a subject or a writer, I try to burn through everything, whether, if I find a new writer, it's okay. And now I've got to try everything I can find from him or her. So I can remember reading tons of Greek myth books and was fascinated by them. I'm curious, what do you teach and what do you do? And then we'll get to, after you give me a little bit of that, we'll talk about how you tie in Bruce.
Yeah, thanks. So I've been teaching myth at my school for about a decade now, maybe 12 years. And my first lecture that I give is what the definition of a myth is, just broadly speaking. And a myth is a strange thing because a myth is a story. It comes from the Greek word that means word or story. And it's a story that is traditional in the sense that it's handed down from generation to generation. It's handed down from generation to generation, and that means nobody really knows where any of these come from or what the original source of these myths are. But they continue to get told and retold and reshaped in each successive generation. And they're told in such a way that is relevant for the people that are telling the story and for the people that are hearing the story. So in my myth course, I actually don't give any exams because I'm afraid that if I give an exam, what I'll be asking my students for is to tell me what the definitive version of a particular myth is. And myth, by definition, though it has some elements, each myth has their own elements that make it identifiable as a particular myth. The myth of Oedipus, for example, means that he kills his father and he marries his mother. And without those elements, it ceases to be that myth and it will be something else. But they are really flexible and can be told and retold in any number of ways. So that's the definition that I start working with.
Okay. And I go back to right. There is no correct answer. Does Mary get in the car? Because
That's
that is a Bruce Springsteen myth. He has told the story. He has set the up, and it is everyone's version of "Does Mary get in the car" is valid because it is there. So if you don't give tests, do they pass because of audience participation? Me, guy, manager, I'm trying to think, how do you evaluate?
So here's really what the course is about.
Right.
When we are reading myths, I want students to be able to distill the fundamental human question that is being raised in that particular myth. What is it about the human experience that this myth is meant to address?
Because I know early on, as I started reading these books of myths, that in some introduction or somewhere it was taught like, well, it's trying to explain why things happen, and then, but as I read them, not all of them had a reason for that, right? Like you may explain, why the sun moves, right? So it's Apollo and his chariot, but
Right.
and then some of them very much are, well, we're going to explain why there is dew on the ground or why things are happening. But others just seem to be just stories. And I don't know if there was necessarily like a feast, Aesop's fables, right? Like where there if definitely is trying to teach you something.
Yeah. So there's the difference between a myth and a fable
Yeah.
is that a fable has one lesson that it's trying to communicate.
Okay.
Don't act too rashly. Treat everyone with respect. Those myths, those fables usually involve animals, and they're trying to communicate one thing. A myth is trying to communicate many things simultaneously. It's addressing multiple different. They're stories with multiple points that they're trying to make. So yes, there are certain myths about why the sun is going from one side of the sky to the other, and there's a particular kind of name for those myths. But I tend not to focus on those myths in my class. They're important myths, but in a general education course, what I want students to begin to do is to explore what it means to be a human being. What does it mean that we someday are going to die? How do we begin to determine what the meaning of life is really about? How do we relate to our parents? How do we relate to our kids? What does it mean to risk something?
One of the things, as I was talking about earlier, Reverend Skinner was the pastor who was my high school pastor before I moved to Catholicism. And there was something that there is a passage where after Christ had died and he's resurrected, and he has the whole feed my sheep, feed my sheep, feed my sheep story.
Mm-hmm.
And what struck me, and this was probably 40 to 50 years ago, but I stand by that, with the going that each time, Jesus asked that, he kept digging. And finally, as he put it, like, do you love me? And he's like, well, finally goes, yeah, I love you, but.
Right.
And Christ was like, okay, now then that we've gotten all the other stuff, now I can work with you. And I've remembered that often when I'm working with an employee or a coworker or a family member, when we get to the, I'm not happy with this situation. I've been telling you, oh, it's fine. And now when I finally get to you, no, actually, when you do this behavior, it makes me act this way. Or when this happens, I feel this way. Okay, once we've gotten to the root of the problem, now we can fix it.
Right.
So I don't know if that's a myth, but that is something that has stuck with me as that part of the Bible that I think I use fairly often in my real life.
Yeah, that's really what I'm aiming for. I'm trying to not teach. I'm trying to teach students about the ancient world, yes, but I'm also trying to give them some tools which they can, once they graduate college, they will have thought about some of the major things that they're going to face as they get older. Mm-hmm. Because when they're 18 to 22, they're not thinking about their mortality. No. Because they live in COVID, yes. There are, where death is more around the corner for us now than it probably has ever been for us in our lifetimes. Absolutely. But if you're living in ancient Greece, like half of the people who are born don't survive into adulthood, right? So there are no parents that are out there in the world that have not experienced the loss of a child. There are no kids that haven't experienced the loss of a sibling. These are things that are present every day for people living in the ancient world that aren't present for us now. But they're things that through the miracle of modern science, we don't have to face until we're in our 30s, 40s, 50s, when people around us start dying at a ripe old age, if everything goes well. Yeah. But if you're not around it, how do you know how to work with it when you're young, Yeah.
Is there any one, and I promise listeners we're going to get to Bruce, but I'm fascinated by this. Is there any one particular myth that kind of blows people's minds. Like I remember that I will have a story that I will read, and I remember thinking, I very clearly understand that this is what the story is about and this is the ending. And then I've had really good English teachers and literature teachers go, oh no, but they say something. I go, wait a minute. No, that isn't what the story's about at all. And then and now my mind's blown up.
So I'm going to use this as a way to turn into how Bruce relates to all this.
Perfect.
Okay. So the first thing that I ask my students to read is Homer's Odyssey.
Okay.
We spend the first month or so of class reading Homer's Odyssey. And everyone has heard something about Homer's Odyssey, right? They know that it's a big, long journey. That's what an Odyssey is. And they may have heard about like the Cyclops, and Odysseus, who's the hero, gouging his eyes out, or the sirens, the siren song, avoiding the siren song. And that is what people think about when they are thinking about the Odyssey.
Absolutely.
But actually, that's only about 4 books. It's about like one small section. It's 24 chapters, which we call books. And that's only 4 of those 24. Okay. Right. The other 20 are about other things. Right.
Okay.
And they're not about the journey at all. For most of the Odyssey, actually, Odysseus isn't going anywhere. He's either not present or he's sitting in one place. See, you just gave me a look like, what about
exactly.
Your mind is just blown.
Yes,
right?
It is. Yes, it is.
And I'll tell you what the Odyssey is about, because it relates to why I teach Springsteen on Broadway. So okay. The first 4 books of the Odyssey are about the fact that Odysseus is not at home. And when he's not at home, we focus in on his son, who has to grow up without the influence of a father, and who relies on his mother to provide any kind of guidance for him. There's all these problems that are happening in Odysseus's world without him there. He's been gone for 20 years. He's been fighting in a war for 10 years, and he's been trying to get home for 10 years. So he's off traveling. Our focus isn't on Odysseus and all of his wonderful adventures in war or his adventures with the Cyclops. It's what are the effects of his absence on the people that aren't with him? His son, who doesn't know how to be a man. He hasn't had a father for 20 years. His wife, who doesn't know whether she should remarry or wait for him. She's supposed to be loyal to him. But there are people who want to marry her because she's the queen, and because without a king, the place is in tremendous disarray and disorder. Then we meet Odysseus trying to get home. And that's kind of the middle part, right? Where he's trying to make his way home. He's stuck on an island for 7 years with a beautiful goddess, staring out at the sea, crying his eyes out during the day, but he's called into the bed of the goddess at night because that's why she's holding him hostage there. And then, he gets brought to this other place, and he tells all these great stories. And then those people, they send him home. And the second half is Odysseus coming home in disguise, by the way. He has to put on like a guise of an old person because he doesn't want to be recognized for fear that they might kill him when he returns home, because he's going to be outnumbered by people that want to take his position and aren't going to exactly be happy to see him. So we have to watch him return home and try to make peace with this place that he's been away from for 20 years, and begin to understand who he is in relation to this place and what he's coming back, not the same person, but the place is the same and hasn't moved on the way that he has. So what's the relationship going to be there? He comes back and he kills everybody that is trying to marry his wife and take all of his possessions. And that's what the Odyssey is about.
Okay.
So how does this relate to Bruce? Well, What I've just described is essentially the structure of the entire Springsteen on Broadway show. Springsteen begins with telling stories of his youth, growing up, talking about his relationship to his dad and his relationship to his mom. That's
right.
how the Odyssey begins, actually. Springsteen talks about, Bruce talks about how his relationship as a child with his dad was really strained because his dad, even though he was there, there's this one line where he says his dad is at the kitchen table, but he was unreachable.
Yes.
That's exactly the experience that Telemachus has, trying to learn how to be a man without his father present. Odysseus is gone. Well, okay, so Bruce's father's gone, but he's there because he has suffering from mental illness, right? So you can see what I mean, that there are these questions, but what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be an adult, that are absolutely central to both of these works?
Yes. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Another thing that comes to mind is we were just watching as a family the latest Stars series in that Power universe, Power Book 2.
Right.
And one of the main characters' husband comes back from jail. And all of a sudden he's like, now then you don't need to run the streets. You can go back to your house. I'm here now. You can take care of the home. You don't need to run drunks anymore. That's what I will do. And I stopped it and I said, I've heard from many people that one of the biggest reasons that military families have divorce is that traditional, and I realize that isn't the case now, but the male would go off to be in the submarine for 3 months at a time, or would go off to, serve overseas for a year. And then the spouse, the wife, would have to run the household and would have to do everything because he's not there. And then when he'd come back, okay, now then I'm used to doing everything. And they're like, no, I can't flip back and forth I have to do everything when you weren't here. And now then you expect me to go back to this role. So I was thinking, as you're talking about, right, the queen had to learn how to do everything without him. And then the adjustment of him coming back, just was very current day. I mean, this is something that happens every day.
Exactly. And what I would say to you, Jesse, is that it's right there at the foundation of what we call Western literature.
Yeah.
That Homer is asking us to think about the costs of war, not just on the bodies lost and lives in battle, but he's asking us to focus in on those that are left behind while all this is going on. That war is destructive, not just to the civilizations or the cultures that are fighting one another, where the war is actually taking place. Even if the war isn't on your own soil, there are costs to it.
Yes.
And that's what Homer's asking us to think about.
Yeah.
In the beginning, which incidentally is something that Bruce also tackles in the middle section of his show, where he's talking about, in particular, when he offers the Born in the USA story about Walter and Bart, right? That Bruce does not go to the war, but he asks, he recognizes that him not going to the war has a cost. Even that has a cost. Yes, he's alive and with us, but there's something that clearly he's carrying on his conscience and has been carrying on his conscience for a long time.
I think I know I've shared this on the podcast, but that line before he goes into the blues version of Born in the USA is he goes, I often wonder who went in my place.
That's right.
And that, and I always think of that when I see people being the way people will be on bulletin boards and social media about, Bruce was a draft dodger, or, so rich people, or, not going to serve. And I always think of that there was a toll to that, and there we as fans know the whole story that he ended up not getting drafted. This was, because of medical reasons, but there is that guilt of I didn't go.
That's
And
right.
there is that consequences. There is my dad was in the military 20 plus years, and my mom absolutely talks about that having to do everything while he was in Vietnam and then him going back was a huge adjustment for them. That, and they ended up divorcing over, not just for that, but because of that. And that is a cost of war that you would think as we grow as a society, we would get past certain things, but I guess there are certain things that are fundamental. And as you're
Exactly.
discussing this, yeah.
And so I'll say this, that when Odysseus returns from the war and he sees that his household is being beset by all these people that want to marry his wife.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's perfectly reasonable for them to want to marry his wife Penelope because they haven't had a king for 20 years. What?
Yes.
And like there's no one who's in charge of anything. Like things are not progressing. They're not moving on. It's perfectly reasonable to expect that your life will that the world should continue in the absence of those people that are gone. But from their perspective, from the returning vet's perspective, that there is, at least for Odysseus, it's no, you're supposed to keep this place for me until I return. And the way he handles those suitors, the people that are trying to marry his wife Penelope, is he kills them all. He murders every last one of them, 108 people, with the help of his son and a few loyal servants. That's it. They lock them in a room, and he strings a bow, his bow and arrow, and he shoots it through the neck of who he sees as the leader. And then he and his son, they mow the rest of them down. And it's a scene of tremendous violence. There's blood everywhere. There's guts everywhere. And the cruelty and the horror of that moment strikes modern audiences as especially brutal. And I think it would have also struck ancient audiences as especially brutal. But that's what happens when you send people off to war. They come back and they don't reintegrate well into society. There was a work of a psychiatrist. His name is Jonathan Shea. And he had been working with returning veterans from Vietnam in working with PTSD. And he had some sort of health problem. I can't remember what it was. But while he was recovering from that health problem, he read the Iliad and the Odyssey because he was stuck in bed. And as he was reading those Homeric poems, he said to himself, "Oh my God, the descriptions in here are exactly what I'm hearing from my PTSD Vietnam veterans."
Stephen, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because as you were telling the story and you were talking about his anger and the, with his son and the few servants and putting him on a room and killing him, I was like, gosh, that almost sounds like this over, PTSD. He's overcompensating instead of understanding the reality of, yes, it's been 20 years. Things must have moved on. Now that I'm back, let's figure out what's going on. A very very simple solution, right? Well, let's just kill them all and let the gods sort it out.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And where to bring it back to Bruce again, this moment when Odysseus returns and he has his son by his father's side, there's a reconciliation there between those two. There's actually a really beautiful recognition scene when Odysseus shows up. He's dressed up like this old beggar, and his son walks into a room and greets someone else with the term like Papa, Daddy, and Odysseus has to watch his son greet another person who was maybe a male role model for him, and what that might have done to him. And shortly thereafter, Odysseus reveals himself, and he says, "It's the Luke, I am your father moment.
Yeah,
it's I am your father," and they begin to hold one another, and they're weeping. And the way that Homer describes it, he says, it's like a mother bird who comes back to the nest with worms to feed her babies, and she finds them gone. That's the weeping. They cried, Telemachus, Odysseus' son, and Odysseus cried like that because they're crying over things that are gone and can never, ever, ever be replaced. You can't ever, that loss is, to use Springsteen's words, it's an irretrievable loss.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Because, you're thinking this like, 20 years, like you left whatever young I was. I'm now a man. I am, as I'm a totally different person, and you have, these changed you. The other thing I wanted, and I'm sure you're going to get to this, but you mentioned that the middle part is this journey. And,
Yes.
Bruce talks about, right, the band and
That's
going
right.
together. And then also the epic tale of him in the truck learning how to, this
Exactly.
journey of going there. Yeah.
Exactly. So what I started to say, Jesse, is that I don't think that Bruce has necessarily read the Odyssey. Maybe
Right.
he has. I don't know. I have no evidence of that. But it's interesting that the structure of Springsteen on Broadway follows pretty closely the structure of the Odyssey, whether Bruce knows it or not. Because there's the story about his mom and his dad first and his absence of his father, and then how he relied on his mother, bought him the guitar, and he sings that really beautiful song, and then we get the story about him traveling to make that show. He sings The Promised Land and Thunder Road, leaving home for the first time and all this. Yeah, it's just, okay, it's not about, the Odyssey is about Odysseus' son and then Odysseus. Springsteen is about him as a young person and then is getting started and then forming the band and then later on. But it's interesting how the show follows the same pattern.
And I take it the same thing. We get the quote unquote happy ending, right? With Land of Hope and Dreams and Dancing in the Dark, similar to Odysseus back with his family, right?
Right. Except the end of the Odyssey is much darker. But I will tell you, I had the opportunity to see the most recent iteration of, okay, what do I do here? What do I say? Which way do I go? All right, here's what I'm going to say.
Okay.
So
you can go both, by the way.
I will. I'm going to do both.
Okay.
So Odysseus receives this message when he visits the underworld that his journey, he will make it back home and he will restore order, but that won't be the end of his story. He's going to have to go on yet another journey after that. So even though the Odyssey ends, and it ends on this really dark place, there are points in Homer's poem that point to the fact that Odysseus' story is going to continue on after this. And when I teach that moment in class, I ask them how that might relate to Springsteen's closing song in the Netflix special, which is Born to Run.
Right.
Of course, Springsteen, that whole Born to Run section is about Bruce returning home to see his old tree is gone, right? That he's back to the place where he grew up, but is recognizing that it is somehow different, which is the experience that Odysseus has when he returns back to Ithaca. He's upset that the place isn't the way that he left it and the way that he remembered it 20 years ago. So there's Odysseus is having that experience and Bruce is having that experience.
But if you say that it goes dark, then now that he ends, instead of Born to Run with I'll see you in my dreams. That's
right. That there's a song. This is the more recent version that I got to see in July. Or maybe we went in August. I went to see in August. It ends on a much more somber note that reminds us of our mortality.
Right.
And that is something that, okay, Bruce isn't talking about going and murdering 108 people. But at the end of the Odyssey, we see where it all ends up for everybody. And that is everybody ends up dead. And so what do we do with that? Which is why I say, what does it mean that we are all mortal? And in the last, few records that Bruce has done, he really has been exploring aging and mortality. Western Stars is very much about having to work with the fact that the road ahead is shorter than the road behind.
Absolutely.
At the beginning of Western Stars, we get hitchhiking where, we get a hitchhiker. It's a young person jumping in cars. And the very last moment of Western Stars is Moonlight Motel, where the narrator pulls into a parking spot,
Yes.
right? The road has come to an end at the end of Western Stars. And the road is long and seeming without end is how we begin. I'll see you in my dreams. And so, I don't know.
Well, what I agree with you. Part of this is your lenses because of your knowledge seeing this, but it isn't necessarily that long of a stretch, right? I mean,
That's right.
It is. I have told the story before that my friend Ken cannot watch a submarine movie because he served 2 tours in a submarine and he just sees everything that's wrong in the film. I mean, he's totally pulled out of the narrative. And when I watched Fatal Attraction, at the time I was working at an insurance company, and there is the point where the Michael Douglas's character's wife's car is vandalized, and then she gets in a wreck. And my first thought was, wow, 2 claims in less than 3 months. Her insurance is really going to go high. and which has nothing to do with the film. But I love seeing that it is not a perfect, exactly right, but it's close enough. There's a lot to do with that.
There is a lot to do with that. And there's another thing too. When Springsteen sings, "I'll see you in my dreams," I think what he might be getting at is, even though individuals are gone, their memories live within us who remain, right?
Yes.
And that's the whole point of mythology, right? That even though Odysseus is long dead and the Greeks are long gone, the ancient Greeks are long gone, we are still obsessing over who they were, the questions that they were asking, and the stories that they told by continuing to tell the story. We tell them in new ways. We change them to meet what our particular audience today needs from us and what we need to do with our own stories. But it does continue on, not in any kind of physical way, but in this incorporeal story. And I think that's in part what's happening with Springsteen on Broadway. "I'll see you in my dreams," "Letter to You," Western Stars. I think Springsteen is working with that in some pretty powerful ways.
Yeah, I know that when Letter to You first came out, and there was a lot of talk about, is this it could feel like an ending. And Maureen Van Sant said she felt like it was the ending and beginning of a new chapter to her. As a fan, she says, "I know nothing about this. I but as a fan, I feel like it is both an ending and a beginning of that." What I think is interesting, right, is that by nature, Bruce is a great storyteller.
That's right.
Whether it's I think it was Ron Martz who was on the podcast, who's a writer, and he said, "We know he's a good storyteller. Why are we not surprised that on these My Home to Yours that they're so entertaining? He's a great storyteller. So whatever medium he picks to tell the story, he's going to do a good job." And so it goes back to, from my perspective, listening to you, this classic myth is a certain tale. That there is, just like there's a structure of a short story that I learned in English, I can make the motion. I don't remember the words, but the climax and the resolution and all that. There is a structure to good storytelling, whether it's a movie, a book, or a Greek play, and he's following that almost I don't know how much of that is instinct or just because he is a very smart man
Well,
that he knows.
I think it's I think there's something beyond him. He talks about this 1+1 = 3 in the moment
Yeah.
where he's doing where he's doing 10th Avenue Freeze Out. I think there's something to that. There's something supernatural about this. The ancient Greek poets, they were channeling something higher than themselves when they did this. They would stand up there with a lyre, which is, the modern equivalent would be something like a guitar, and they would stitch together stories that they had memorized. But they look at their audience and they maybe shift it a little bit according to what is going. So they were myth makers. They were storytellers. That's exactly what Bruce is. He's part of this tradition that goes all the way back to Homer.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it extends far and wide. Whether or not he knows it, is conscious of it, there's something when human beings get together in front of other human beings and they sing songs and they tell stories. Because Homer was meant to be performed live. It wasn't meant to be read as a dead book. These were performed in front of audiences, sung with a stringed instrument. Something happens. And when I sat and listened and actually saw in person Springsteen on Broadway, there was something that was happening inside of me that was immaterial, that it was a 1+1 = 3 kind of experience. I think that's Bruce's way of trying to articulate what goes on in a shared communal experience like that. I think that's why Bruce is so good live, because he knows what that's about and he's channeling something.
Yeah, you hear he'll change. They'll talk about sometimes he'll change the set list or the style or what's going on. He feels that mood. He said in an interview that his biggest fear of performing the Super Bowl was that there are nights when the band comes out flat, and what they do is they change things up to get this started, and I won't have time to do that. So when you think of that, and I'm a big fan of, I have gone to different pubs, and there for a while there till Katrina. Daniel Flaherty has owned an Irish pub in New Orleans, and his bar had two sections. You walked into a middle section. To the left was a bar, typical bar where a lot of the jukebox and beer, but to the right was the song room.
Right.
And there is this beautiful sign that said that this tradition, that this would be storytellers and that the audience would treat it with reverence.
That's right.
And there would be no talking.
That's right.
And it, sure enough, when you went in there, there was no talking among the audience. It was, everyone was listening intently to the performers, both to the music and the stories they tell. And that's what Broadway felt like to me. That it was that. And I go back to the VH1 Storytellers, where he says, was I consciously thinking of this? Did I mean to do it? I don't know, but I felt all of it.
That's right.
And I think that's where it goes to.
Exactly. And I so I begin, the first thing that students read is the Odyssey, and the last thing they do is view Springsteen on Broadway. And it's a way of bringing everything full circle, right? It follows the same structure, but there's also some other things. This is the closest thing that I can give you, that I know about, for you to have an experience of what it would be like to sit in front of Homer. The stories are different, the instrumentation is different, the specifics are different, but the experience, that's the same.
And I think what goes back to when we first heard of this, I pictured, and by the way, my second show was a Devils and Dust show, and I was just amazed. Like, this would be what it was like. In fact, I had a friend said, this is what I picture if Bruce was lecturing at some university or college, is that Devils and Dust show is what I think he would do. He would tell stories, he would talk about the structure, then he'd play a song. And so that's what I thought Broadway would be. And when you go, and I was lucky enough to see the first round, but even when you watch it on Netflix, there is no good evening or nothing. It is he immediately is in character and
Right.
telling his story.
Well, and part of what that character is, Jesse, is he's deconstructing the character that he created. So
Yes.
he's recognizing that he has, in one way or another, made a myth of himself
Yes.
and is deconstructing that myth. And he talks about that moment quite pointedly when he says, "When I was looking for clothes to wear, I put on my father's clothes."
Yes.
Right? Because those, it's something like, those whose love we wanted but didn't get, we imitate them. Right? And so there he's talking about playing a character, and this whole, mid 1980s Bruce, where he's wearing denim, denim pants and cut off shirts that show his muscles. He has the body of a working man with the sweatband on his head. Right. All of that is an idealized version of a working person, what they might look like.
I'm also reminded, I'm a big Penn and Teller fan, and when they perform, they're often breaking down the persona of magic. They are showing, it's not that they give away secrets to magic, because they have magic look at a different way. And the honesty of Bruce to say that, I made it up. That's how good I was, right?
Right. That's right.
And that pulling back the curtain is so fascinating. And I had never thought about the Odyssey or these other, I think about Shakespeare at times, and I remember that Shakespeare isn't meant to be read; it's meant to be heard and
That's
watched.
Right.
And so, I guess, as you're saying, that's what these were meant to as well.
That's right. And I'll say something else too, Jesse. So, a couple of things. One, there's this great story I love. I think it's in Little Steven's autobiography, but I've heard him tell it many times. Where I think Bruce invites Little Steven over to hear the demos, what would ultimately become Tunnel of Love.
Yeah.
And Little Steven hears the first song, Ain't Got You. And he says something like, "What the hell is this? I got caviar on ice and all this. This is terrible. Get rid of this." And Bruce says something, "I'm just trying to be honest about my life." And I think Little Steven, at least the way that he tells it, I don't know what really happened.
Yeah.
Said, "They don't come to hear about you. They come to hear about them."
Yes.
And that is the thing that a good storyteller can do. Bruce's, we all know, especially those of us who are real fans, we know that Bruce has gone through many stages, and he's put on many different kinds of personae at various points. Some of them resemble who he probably is in real life. Some of them are caricatures. There's always a campy quality to what he does. If he falls down on the stage and Clarence has to come and revive him, well, it's all a show. We know that he's not really passing out from rock and roll and all that. But ancient poets were called rhapsodes. And what a rhapsode is, it means a person who stitches together parts of the story. And a rhapsode would stitch together parts of these well-known stories, as we said, based on the people that are there, because they have to address their concerns and what's going on with them. And that is, I think, in part, when Bruce is successful, his more successful work, not that any of it's unsuccessful, but the stuff that connects isn't about him. It's because he's telling us about who we are. Though it's part of who he is, so we're connecting with him, but it's more about us. That's what I would say.
I love this.
I love it.
Thank you. This has been fascinating. I definitely feel like this is 1 + 1 = 3. This is fascinating. I I now wish I was going to your course. I just this sounds like a blast. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. You actually, this is another thing that you'd actually have to be in the room for,
yeah,
because it's really, I let students sit in a group and we do it over the course of 2 days, and they just go through each section of Springsteen on Broadway. And what I'm asking them to do is say, what do you think about this? Have you experienced something like this? It becomes about them. And in the end, I say, look, I know that you guys are in your 20s, and for you, it's not Bruce Springsteen, it's Taylor Swift or whatever.
yeah,
But I say you have to demand this from your artists too.
yes.
Springsteen is not going to be with us in 30 years, 40 years. I don't know. I hope he's with us for a long time, obviously. But he's left behind a body of work, and I think that body of work, it should be a model for others to imitate, as Homer was a model for others to imitate.
Stephen, this has been a joy. Thank you so much. Any final thoughts?
I don't know. We've said it all, I think. I don't know what else.
I tell you what, this is once again a casual, you know, mention in your email to me, and we have now just spent almost an hour discussing this. And what a great episode! I cannot wait to get this out so people to hear it. If someone wants to reach you, what's the best way?
Well, they're going to have to do it by email. I don't
I
have
understand.
any. I don't have any. So it's my full name, Stephen, Stephen, no space, and my last name, Maiullo, Maiullo @gmail.com.
All right.
And if anyone is interested in the lectures that I have recorded for my students, I'm happy to share those, or the question sheets. If you want to check those out, I'm happy to share those with you all.
That's nice. That's good. I'm now thinking I might have to check out Homer.
Well, and that would make me very happy, because there are things that I love. I love great storytellers too, Jesse, and I see Bruce as part of this great long history that extends back all the way to Homer, who's great.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much. Listeners, please email me, setlistingbruce@gmail.com, and tell me what you think. And we'd love to hear your feedback. For now, go get vaccinated, go get boosted. Let's remain diligent in taking care of each other, because that's how we're going to get through this. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, listeners, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye. I want and need your feedback. You can reach me multiple ways to tell me what you like or don't like about the show. You can reach out to give me guest suggestions, or maybe to join me on the podcast yourself. We're on Twitter @SetListingBruce or @JesseJacksonDFW. I have an Instagram, SetListingBruce or JesseJacksonDFW. Our Facebook page, facebook.com/setlistingbruce. Go to patreon.com/setlistingbruce to find out how you can support the show, and we have several tiers of support. Please go to your favorite podcast player and hit subscribe, and tell a friend about the podcast, because that is the way we're going to grow. If you're not tired of hearing me speak, you can hear me on Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast, where Charles Skaggs and I talk all things Doctor Who. The How Many podcast, where me and my friends Gary, Scott, Bob, and Jr. talk pop culture. And finally, my newest podcast, The Last Best Hope for Conversation, a Babylon 5 podcast, where Karen, Lou, and I are going through the TV show Babylon 5 one episode at a time. I am always looking for guests, so please reach out to me, setlistingbruce@gmail.com.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.